Hi everyone, we're now going to look at visual attention. Notice this is chapter 6 in the textbook. I've gone from chapter 4 to chapter 6. We will be covering chapter 5 right after the first midterm. To start off with, I'll take a look at what attention is and then focus again on visual attention. I'll discuss saccades and fixations. And this will lead us into overt and covert attention, and selective and divided attention. I'll go through some of the evidence, whether or not attention can enhance perception and even action. I will do so in perhaps an unusual and unexpected way. It might even be fun to enhance our perception and action. Number 4 asks a question about the nature of attention. Is attention location-based? That is, do we pay attention to a particular location in space? Or is attention all about objects? Do we pay attention to an object and location is just incidental? I will also go into balance syndrome and unilateral neglect and what they can tell us about the nature of attention. I also want to explore, once again, the absence of perception, in this case, the absence of visual attention. So I'll put blindness in quotes here. 2 forms of blindness in which attention limits perception. Number 6 is a thorny theoretical problem called the binding problem, and I'll talk about a couple of potential solutions to explain how our attentional visual system handles this problem. And then I'll go into a bit more depth on something called feature integration theory, and I'll discuss its pros and cons. But first, attention is a tricky thing. Attention is not something that we can study directly. We can only study it through things that it applies to. So again, in this section, we're going to be focusing on visual attention. Attention means typically that you are focusing on or selecting one thing at the expense of other things. We can't pay attention to everything at the same time. And yes, the amount of information that we can process is limited, and there are good reasons for that. Our sensory systems are limited. You can only look at one thing at a time. And when you're looking at it, you're causing that image to fall in your fovea, which again is actually very, very small. We're not taking in all of the information that is visually available to us. So our input system is limited, as is our output system, our motor systems. Our movements are planned, words are spoken sequentially. You can't speak 2 words at the same time. That is absolutely impossible. So it kind of makes sense that attention is likewise limited. When we look at a visual scene, we might think that we take in everything all at once. That is not how it works, however. We take in little bits at a time, little bits and pieces that are stitched together. We know this is done by using camera-based eye tracking equipment. It's actually a camera looking at your eye, and it's calibrated to determine to know where your eye is looking at. Now, when your eyes are moving, this is called a saccade or a saccade. They are small, very rapid eye movements. There's a phenomenon called saccadic suppression. Some spatial frequencies are attenuated while your eyes are moving. In other words, you're kind of sort of blind during a saccade. Now, this is not something that you notice. You cannot detect the motion of your eye or any kind of gap in between. You can try this if you like. Look at your eye in a mirror and see if you can catch your eye moving. So look off to the side and then look straight at your eye. Now don't try this on your phone with the selfie camera. There is a bit of a lag and a delay, and you might actually catch your eye moving. Try it in a mirror. You're not going to be able to catch your eye moving. You also won't notice that there's any gap in your visual perception while your eye is moving. It isn't blacked out or anything. Very clever experiments have told us that this suppression begins right before your eye starts to move. So your eye is getting prepared to move And at some level in your visual system, this suppression starts. It is nothing to do with your eyeball getting deformed or the lens of your eye or anything. That's what I mean by it's not an optical effect. Your eyes are moving, but they also stop moving. When they stop, this is called a fixation. In general, on average, you have about 3 fixations per second. And now, after me having said that, you are going to be so self-conscious about this for the next couple of minutes. Don't worry, it will go away. Where do you choose to look? If your eyes are landing on one spot, where are your eyes going to go next? How do you decide that? There are a few things that can influence this. One is a bottom-up process called visual salience. If there's something that's a different color or a different brightness, hey, look at that bright, shiny object, that may attract your visual attention and your eye fixations. There's also a top-down process as well. What knowledge do you have? What do you expect to see? Are you looking for something? This is directed by yourself. That's a top-down process. And then we might have things that occur in experiments, like in a task, you might be asked to do something. I'm going to sneak in a little bit of art because, hey, why not? I'm allowed to. So although we think when we open our eyes we are seeing an entire scene all at once, we're not. It's kind of like we're constructing a photo collage. We've got these myriad snapshots collected over time, stitching them together, and the result is that we think we are looking at the entire thing all at once, but no, it is like a photo collage. So I'm sticking with eye fixations here for a bit, and the next topic, overt and covert attention. Overt attention is when you are looking at something and you're paying attention to the thing that you're looking at. So pretty straightforward. But can we split apart our fixations from our attention? That is, can your eyes be looking at one thing, but you're actually ignoring what your eyes are looking at, and you're directing your attention to something off to the side, something in your periphery? This was a question asked by Hermann von Helmholtz in 1896. And this is what he did to put this to the test. He put a matrix of letters on his wall with a fixation cross in the center. That is where his eyes would look. That would be his point of fixation. He fixated on that cross and then turned the lights off. Then he directed his attention to a certain quadrant of this letter chart. And then he illuminated the room with a spark, a very brief flash of light. And the question that he asked himself is, when I'm looking at this fixation cross, can I detect and identify some of the letters even though I'm not looking directly at them? Turns out the answer to that was yes. In other regions that he was not attending to, he could not identify those letters. That's pretty good evidence that attention is independent of your fixation. That being said, most of the time they do work together. Now, attention can also work in other ways. Again, we can focus on a particular stimulus, not literally focusing your eyes, but we are devoting a lot of processing to one certain stimulus at the expense of others. This is a more cognitive kind of task, like reading your textbook, and when you're doing that, you're concentrating, and that means you don't want to be distracted, and all those interruptions and distractions don't make it through to your conscious awareness. Other times, however, you may choose to divide your attention. You can take this limited resource of attention and split it. I swear, one time, I saw this person driving on the white mud, and with one hand, they were driving their car. With their other hand, they were drinking a coffee, and with their other hand, they were talking on a cell phone. How is that even possible? Next, I want to turn to attention, perception, and action as well. A lot of this research has been done by Chris Green and Daphne Bavelier. Green was a video gamer, and he was working under the supervision of Bavelier. And Green had this suspicion that people who were avid gamers had very sharp processes of attention and perception. They tested this out and found that people who were avid action video gamers did better on tests of attention and also information processing. But this is not determining cause and effect. This could just be a correlation. Maybe people who are really good at tests of attention and information processing seek out video games, and because their processing is so acute, this makes them enjoy video games and play them a lot more. So, somehow you would have to design experiments to sort this out to establish cause and effect. Could it possibly be that playing action video games enhances your attention? So, this is what they did. They recruited people who were non-gamers. They weren't really hardcore video gamers at all. And they made them play Medal of Honor Allied Assault for an hour a day for 10 days. They had to pay them for this, by the way, too. They had to pay them to play this video game. What they found is that over 10 days, their visual attention actually improved after only an hour a day for 10 days. Now, they did also have a control group. In the control group, they played another video game. They played Tetris. So, yes, it's a video game, but it's not the same kind of video game as an action video game. What does this tell us? It seems that attention is a skill. It's not a fixed quantity. You might be able to change it by practice. Interesting. And this led to a number of experiments done by Bavelier and other people. Just really briefly, here are some of the other findings. It was found that action video gamers can track more moving objects simultaneously. And further, the more you play action video games, the better this gets. This is cause and effect. It's not a mere correlation. They've taken people who are really non-gamers and they made them play 30 hours of Unreal Tournament 2004. This actually enhanced visual acuity. This is the test of visual acuity. You fixate on this point, and then you make judgments about these objects appearing in your periphery. In this case, clearly, this bottom T is upside down. People's visual acuity improved by about 20%. As your mom told you, stop playing those video games. You'll ruin your eyes. No, if you choose the video game carefully, you might actually improve your vision. Take that, Mom. From there, things just ramped up. How about 50 hours playing Call of Duty 2? This improved contrast sensitivity. So another different measure of visual ability. Improved it by around 50% compared to a control group. They were made to play The Sims 2. But don't feel bad for them. They did get paid for that. But wait, there's more. It can increase your reaction time if you play action video games by 13%. Now this is pretty neat because there was no drop-off in accuracy on a number of different RT reaction time tasks. Now typically we would expect a speed accuracy trade-off. The faster you get, the less accurate you are, and vice versa. But no, it increased reaction time, but didn't increase accuracy. It's almost like magic. In this study, playing Wii Mario Kart or Unreal Tournament improved visuomotor control. In other words, it improved driving. What? Playing Mario Kart can improve your driving? Yeah, just watch out for those bananas. Now, some people really don't want to accept this. I think really that's what's underlying this. Playing video games can lead to improvements? No, video games must be bad. Maybe that's their starting point, but from a scientific point of view, they wanted to try to replicate some of the previous findings. In this particular study, they were looking for cognitive improvement, so a very, very high-level improvement of functioning, and they found that playing any kind of game did not lead to cognitive improvement. So what I'm saying is, yeah, you can play some video games. You may expect some improvement, depending on what game you play, how much you play it, but it's not going to bump up your IQ, so don't expect that. Okay, I want to turn to examining the nature of attention. Is attention all about focusing on a particular location in space? And we have some evidence that goes back to 1978. Now, Michael Posner, who led this study, viewed attention as a spotlight. You can move a spotlight to shine on different locations on a stage, for example. You might shine it over here, and you can move it, and you can shine it over there. It does take a bit of time to move the spotlight. So this is the metaphor for attention. So that leads to three proposed components. If you want to move your spotlight, you have to disengage it, and you have to move it over to the new location, and then re-engage it, so turn it back on again. And the idea is that these components are going to take some time. So Posner and his colleagues developed a task, which is called pre-cueing, but a lot of people just call it the Posner or Posner spatial cueing task. This is the way it works. People directed their eyes at a fixation cross, pretty typical for a lot of this research. There were three conditions. In the neutral condition, there was no cue presented. I'll show you the cue coming up in a second. In condition number 2, called a valid condition, an arrow appeared, and it pointed you to the direction where a subsequent stimulus would actually appear. Third condition is called invalid. An arrow still points, but you know what? It's pointing you in the wrong direction. It's pointing in the opposite direction of where a stimulus would appear. Now, the actual task for the participants was to press one of two buttons on which side did the target appear. So to press that button and to press it as quickly as possible. So here are the conditions. Here's the neutral, the fixation cross, and then a square appears. So you would press the left button on this trial as quickly as possible. Here's the valid. The fixation cross is replaced by an arrow. It's pointing to the left. Yeah, it didn't lie. In the invalid case, arrow points to the left, but oh, it was lying to you. Square was on the right. Now, in doing this, all of these are randomly intermixed. You don't know what kind of trial you're going to get. Here are the results. So really what we're going to do is compare everything to the neutral case. There's no cue appearing whatsoever. So it takes about 250 milliseconds. In the valid condition, people are faster than in the neutral condition. In the invalid, people are, well, they're a whole lot slower. It takes them a whole lot longer. What does this tell us about attention? Your reaction time is affected by the type of cue, valid or invalid. Your attention can be directed to a certain location, and if it does that, it can enhance your perceptual processing. We can see that in the reaction time being faster. In an invalid cue, presumably we've got to disengage, move, and re-engage our attention. All of this takes a lot longer before we can press the correct button. This shows us that attention is exogenous, that is driven by external things like stimuli. That is an example of bottom-up processing. But it can also be endogenous, goal-directed, internal, and that's top-down. I want you to pay attention to these, whatever they are, squiggles. So we've just learned that there is evidence that attention is location-based. So if you're paying attention to this location, what are you seeing? Can you separate the black from the red figure? If so, how are you doing that? You're separating the two objects that coexist at this one location. Well, should that even be possible if our attention is all about location and not objects? Here's an even better example. Okay, so I've got a face and a house, two of them, and they are overlapping. They are in the same location. Can you just pay attention to the face? Or to the house? Wait, I can do that. That means you can probably do that too. How can we separate two objects in the same location? maybe attention really isn't about location, maybe it's actually about objects. So I want to return to balance syndrome. So again, when people are performing a certain kind of task called a visual search, they experience more kinds of errors called illusory conjunctions. Also, when tested, they have a lot of difficulty in something called a conjunction search. Now, you might want to put an asterisk here and come back to this. I will be explaining what illusory conjunctions are. I promise I will be explaining what a conjunction search is. I'm trying to follow the structure and organization of the textbook, which means I'm going to be discussing what these things actually are towards the end of this lecture. Sorry, I know it's kind of mishmashed here. Balance syndrome includes simultanagnosia, which again, to recap, is difficulty in attending to more than one object at a time, even when they're overlapping in space. Remember the hammer and the milk bottle? What this suggests to us is that attention is object-based. Location is just kind of incidental. And maybe simultanagnosia is a difficulty with one's attention, that you can't shift your attention among different objects. There is another syndrome that I'd like to introduce called unilateral neglect, also called hemispatial neglect. This is usually the result of brain damage. It is a deficit in your awareness of items on one side of space, interestingly. People who experience this kind of brain damage will neglect, that's the word, an object or a part of an object in the contralesional visual field. So you have to remember, once again, objects in the left visual field end up in the right hemisphere. If the right hemisphere is damaged, that means people will have difficulty seeing things in the left visual field, contralesional, on the opposite side to the side of the brain that has the lesion. Examples include people eating food from just one side of their plate, or they shave one side of their face or put makeup only on one side of their face. They fail to dress one half of their body. They'll put on their pants, they'll stick their leg in one leg of the pants, and that's it. There are kind of standard tests in which people are given a drawing to copy, and let's see how they do. Oh dear. Okay, so here's a model of a clock, and the person gets started, and they they're neglecting a lot of the left side. Here's a house, and they're copying that. Again, they start off okay, but again, they're really neglecting the left side. And here's a cat. Again, they start drawing it pretty well, but eventually they just end up neglecting the left side of the cat. Here's an example of a person writing in their journal. Again, they start off using the entire width of the sheet of paper, but they're really clearly neglecting the left side. People with unilateral neglect are often not aware of it. You have to point that out to them. Hey, you only shaved one side of your face. Now, typically, the damage is on the right side of the brain, interestingly, the right posterior parietal cortex. And we know this is important for attention and for selecting visual objects. How do we explain this unilateral neglect? Well, it might be a difficulty in disengaging your attention from the ipsilateral side. That means from the same side. If you cue people, this can help reduce the neglect. If they're drawing a clock, for example, and you go, hey, wait a minute, you just stopped at 7. Here, look at the model. See, it goes 8, 9, 10. You didn't draw that. They'll go, oh, yeah, you're right. But you have to, grab their attention and, put it on a certain spot before they notice it. If left to themselves, they often don't notice. So that's one explanation. Another explanation is that the two hemispheres are in balance. However, after brain damage to one particular part of the brain, this balance is disrupted. And as a result, people cannot divide their attention equally to both sides of space. So let me describe what you're looking at here. Okay, so what people are doing is they're presented with this sheet of letters, and they're told to circle the letter A. Now, the main difference between these two is the one on the left doesn't have a lot of letters. The one on the right clearly has a lot more letters. So again, people are presented with just one of these at a time. So they would just get this one on the left. Now notice this person has circled a lot of the A's on the right side of the page, but very few on the left side. They're missing a lot of the letter A's on the left side of the page. They've neglected the left side of the page. Okay, take that sheet away. Now give them the sheet on the right. Again, the task is to circle the A's. They get lots and lots of the A's on the right side, but look at the left side now. They only got one of the A's on the left side. There are so many other things competing for their attention on the left side that their attentional system is kind of overwhelmed. It can't be, it's like distracted by all the other letters, and they do even poorer in this second task. But again, this seems to be making the case that attention is location-based, right? People have difficulty with the left side of space. However, if we continue to search and seek out other evidence, there is evidence that the syndrome is object-based. So although the evidence I've shown you is that people neglect the left side of space, there is also evidence that people neglect the left side of objects. So here's an example. These are drawings that people are given, and they're asked to copy them. I guess it's a building, kind of a weird shaped building. This is a neglect patient copying them. So we start with the one here. They copy this. Clearly, they've neglected the left half of space. But when you show them this tilted version of it, are they neglecting the left half of space? No, they're neglecting the left half of the object. Here's another test of that, showing people objects and asking them if they're the same or different. Again, this is a way of testing, are they neglecting the left half of space or the left half of the object? Okay, so in this case, there is one little difference in these two. If people say they're the same, well, they're neglecting the left half of space. In this case on the right, people are, again, they're missing the fact that these objects are different. But this little square here is in their right visual field. It shouldn't be neglected. It's not in the left half of space. It's on the left side of the object. So where does this bring us? So I've shown you a bunch of evidence that neglect is space-based, but there's also evidence that it's object-based. How can it be both of these? That's impossible. Let's see. Here is a really cool study by Glyn Humphreys and colleagues in 2010. The participants were all people with brain damage. They all had neglect. That is pretty tough to track down and gather together that many people. The stimuli they used were sheets of paper with 150 drawings of apples on them. But they break down this way. There's 3 different things we want to know about. There are 50 apples that are complete and whole. 50 apples have a gap on their left side, and 50 apples have a gap on their right side. Okay, so we give this sheet of paper to people, and it looks kind of exactly like this. Okay, so if you look closely, there are some intact apples. There are some apples with a gap on the left side, and there are some apples with a gap on the right side. Okay, this is a neat kind of way of setting this up, because there are some apples on the left side of this display, and there are some on the right side of the display. So we can take a look at performance on the left side of space and on the right side of space. We can also take a look at the apples with a gap on the left, apples with a gap on the right. The task given to people was to look through this and in 5 minutes cross out all of the complete apples, the apples with no gap. They found, well, you know what? Not one thing, but two things. We have to be careful about taking overall averages because it might actually hide a bimodal distribution. There might be two things going on. And if we kind of lump it all together into one, it might all kind of cancel out in the average. So in looking closely at the results, they found two distinct patterns. One pattern is called egocentric neglect, and this means that people were unaware or neglected one side of space. So, looking at the participants, 11 people overlooked whole, complete apples on the left side of the page. 2 people missed whole apples on the right side. Again, neglect most often affects the left side of space, but sometimes it can affect the right side of space too. Now, in identifying the people with this pattern of results, they wanted to understand where their brain damage was. For these people, generally it was clustered in the right anterior cortex and some subcortical structures too. But then they continued to look and found another separate, different pattern called allocentric neglect. For these people, they neglected one side of each object. So, again, looking at the number of participants, 8 crossed out apples that had a gap on their left side. That's not what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to cross out whole apples. They're neglecting the left side of the apple. 2 people had kind of the opposite. They crossed out apples with gaps on their right side. Again, identifying these people and taking a look at the kind of brain damage and where that was. For these people, generally the right posterior cortex. There was also some brain damage that was common to both of these two different groups, both the egocentric and allocentric neglect participants. So this image over here on the left, showing the right hemisphere, puts together both groups of people. So in general, those with allocentric neglect had damage in the blue shaded region. People with egocentric neglect generally damage in these regions shaded green. Again, taking a look at common damage, that is indicated by these kind of dark red regions here. So what does this tell us? It's not immediately obvious. Here are the implications. This is actually telling us a lot about the nature of attentional processing. That we're trying to understand it as one thing, but maybe it's not. Maybe attention isn't just one singular thing. Maybe attention can be either location-based or object-based. This study from 2010 indicates to us that maybe these different kinds of attention occur in different parts of the brain. If you get damage to your location-based system, that will produce egocentric neglect. Damage to your object-based attentional system results in that allocentric neglect. Why, though? What would be the point of this? So here's a bit of speculation, but location-based processing of attention might be good for a static scene, something that's not changing. Object-based attention might make a whole lot of sense if you're tracking a moving object, like hunting an animal, potentially. So each of these kinds of attention kind of do make evolutionary sense. I'll stop there.